Shalom uvracha to everybody. Thank you so much for joining. I'm just going to spotlight that. Okay, incredible. What a privilege and a tremendous honor to be able to learn with you in preparation for Parshas Mishpatim, for Shabbos Parshas Mishpatim and Chodesh Adar. I'm just going to finish setting things up here. 1 second. One moment. We're just going to finish setting things up, make sure that we're not distracted. And we are going to begin with Siyata D'Shmaya. Okay, so here in Eretz Yisrael, as many of you know, it is already Chodesh Adar, which is the most amazing thing in the world that we made it here. And Mishenichnas Adar, Marbim Besimcha, as everybody knows, when Adar comes in, Marbim Besimcha, immediately there's an increase in joy. On a simple level, it means Marbim Besimcha, that we increase our joy in these times. On a deeper level, it means that Marbim, everything in the way of bracha, everything in the way of parnasa, everything in the way of refuah, anything that a person is yearning for, Marbim, that we need riboy, that we need things to be increased in our lives. All the good things, Be'ezer Hashem, should be Marbim Dafka Besimcha. And so Mishenichnas Adar, we're already able to tap into the spirit of Marbim, to be Marbe everything good, Besimcha, due to the joy that we have in this special month. And maybe even on a deepest level, this terminology of Marbim Besimcha, which means that when Adar comes, we increase in joy, only goes to be able to demonstrate to us what the status quo is the rest of the year, right? If in Adar Marbim Besimcha, we increase our joy, and in Av Mimatim B'Simcha, we decrease our joy, but the status quo of a Jew is Simcha. That's what the tzaddikim say. It's either a question of Marbim B'Simcha or Mimatim B'Simcha, but the status quo is always Simcha, is always joy. And what is the Simcha of Adar? We could talk about 1,000 years, but just one remez to bring us into it. And we're going to learn, Be'ezer Hashem, a piece from the Sefas Emes on the inyan of Purim and the deepest message of Purim. There are so many, but one of the core ideas, Be'ezer Hashem, we're going to study together tonight. But Adar, in and of its very word, contains two different parts. There's the part of Aleph, the letter Aleph, and then Dar, which means to dwell. Aleph in the Svarim HaKadoshim is always a hint and a reference to the Alufay Shel Olam. Aluf means a chief, to the chief of the world, the master of the world is Alufay Shel Olam, the chief of the world, so to speak. And Dar, of course, means to dwell. And so in this month, Aleph Dar, Adar, is that the master of the world, the Alufa Shel Olam Dar. He comes and dwells within our homes. He comes and dwells within the relationship that we have with others, the Matanas Le'Avyonim, and in certain situations, Adarabah, to be safe, right? And to maintain the distance, to be able to protect people. That's also the inyan of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, is Dar, Shechina Shar, Beinehem, Dafka, sometimes in the separations that are necessary, the master of the world also, that's a vessel for him to dwell. But Aleph Dar, in all of the avodas that we're going to do, the Dalit mitzvahs of the Yom, of Shtia, of drinking, of Mikra Megillah, of Mataras Le'Avyonim, of Mishlach Manas, all of these mitzvahs create vessels for the Aleph, for the Alufa Shel Olam, for the master of the world, to Dar, to dwell, to be able to open our hearts through this incredible Chag and through this incredibly deep Yontiv and this incredibly deep month, to be able once more to open just a little bit deeper that chamber that we have inside of our hearts for the master of the world to come and dwell with us. And there's no simcha greater than that. That's Mishenichnas Adar, Marbim. Everything in life becomes more vibrant, becomes more real, becomes more exciting when we know that we're living life on a mission. That HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who sent us here, dwells within us. He's with us. He's together with us all the time, pumping us with the energy that we need to carry out our shlichus. So I bless us all, Be'ezer Hashem, that we should be able to tap into all of these ideas, the Marbim B'Simcha, the status quo of Simcha the rest of the year, and just on a simple level, to be able to be Marbe, everything should bring more joy into our life, all connected to the concept of Aleph Dar, of the Alufa Shel Olam that comes to dwell within our hearts and souls. And we want to thank the sponsors for this year, one of which is anonymous, and just as a zechus for Am Yisrael, Be'ezer Hashem, it should also be a zechus for him and for his family, Be'ezer Hashem, and a lot of clarity and a lot of simcha and a lot of yeshivadas, Be'ezer Hashem. And one of the sponsorships is Leiba Nishmas. He writes, all of my ancestors, including Yaakov Ben Max, Leiba Bas Berel, Freyda Bas Yaakov, Yitta Bas Yaakov, all of these neshamas should have an aliyah, and as a zechus for a shidduch, for all the singles of Klal Yisrael, for himself included, and a zechus for refuah shleimah for cholei Yisroel, a zechus for the continued atzlacha of LPI. Be'ezer Hashem, amen, to all of these things, and as a zechus for Klal Yisrael to merit Mashiach through the teachings of the Baal Shem, HaKadosh, Chusi Haganaleinu, amen, amen, va'amen. We appreciate the support, and let's begin. Be'ezer Hashem. Okay, so I'm going to share my screen so we can all see the sources together, and let's dive into these teachings with the help of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the Master of the world, who's present, who's here with us, Aleph Dar, who's in this experience of sitting down, Jews from all over the world, to connect to Limud Torah b'Kedusha. What a privilege. What a zechus. Okay, so let's dive into the Mea Shiloach, to the holy Ishbitzer, and he presents a very different take on the inyan of Nasa and Nishma than that which we learned last week. If you remember, just a refresher, last week's Parasha Shiur, which was Wednesday, now Baruch Hashem, we started the course, and that's Sunday and Wednesday night, so we moved the Parasha Shiur to Thursday. But last week we discussed Al Derech Remez, what Nasa and Nishma means in the life of a Jew. What is Nasa and Nishma in my own experience? This aspect of Nasa, to go ahead and we learn to push forth even when we don't have that experience of really understanding, of bina, of a cognitive illumination. But when things are dark and we don't have clarity and we don't have feeling, nasa, push through, keep on pushing. And then nishma, ultimately, we're going to experience that incredible place of nishma, of an unbelievable illumination. And all of that Shas Aliyah, which we talked in the context of Rabbi Nachman's mashal of Shulchan Aruch, as opposed to the Mara that we have to go through sometimes in life, to hang out and to push forth and to get through it. And so here the Mea Shiloach says something a little bit different. It's not really the truth. It's not really different. It's another layer. It's another level of that. And so let's dive into it, because Nasa v'Nishma is also found in Parashas Mishpatim. Vayikach Sefer Abris, the pasuk says, Vayikra ba'aznei ha'am, and Moshe Rabbeinu tells over, reads the Torah to Am Yisrael, and Vayoimru, they say together, Kol Asher Diber Hashem, Nasa v'Nishma, whatever HaKadosh Baruch Hu is telling us, Nasa v'Nishma. And this, if we'll remember, was the aspect that HaKadosh Baruch Hu said, Mi Gila Razel Lebanai, who revealed this secret to my children, Shemalachi Likim Mishtamshim Bay. And we learned in the context of the Torah from the Ma'arinayim that me is Gila Razel Lebanai, the question of me, to ask who is my life force, who is the source of my life, who's giving me energy. To remind ourselves that's Hashem. That's going to give us the ability to get through the nasa, to get through even the mindless activity, just to push through, which we'll see more in the Sefas Emes tonight, the second piece, which is really a Purim Torah, but I want to sort of tie it together with Siyata D'Shmaya, because Purim is also very connected, obviously, with Kabbalas HaTorah we're going to learn about. But what gives us that ability to push through the nasa is the aspect of me, to always ask ourselves, well, who am I? We're learning this a lot in the course. So those chevra, really to get in touch, to re-identify ourselves by our deepest core essence, that at our core we are holy. That's the first principle of the Lost Princess principles. And once we get there, once we really re-identify with that inner holiness, me, that's Gila Razel Labana. That's the deepest secret in the world. And then we're able to push forth and we're able to push through. Okay, says the Heilige Mea Shiloach, Chusi Haganaleinu, Kol Yisroel, amen. Ha'inyan she'agdimu Yisrael nasa v'nishma. What was this that Am Yisrael first said nasa and then nishma? Listen to something so deep, mamish, so deep, so deep. Ki be'emes, he says, the truth is that kol inyanei Torah u'mitzvahs, all of these activities that we engage with in trying to embody the Torah ideal, Sur Meirah, Asay Tov, 613 mitzvahs, 248 assays, 365 lois assays, the whole deal, Ein das ha'adam maseges la'omek ha'kavana. The human mind does not penetrate to the depth, to the deepest depth of the kavana of the mitzvahs. Even if we're zocha to study Pnimius HaTorah, that's our whole inyan, that's what we try to do every week in Chassidus and Kabbalah, and all the deeper, the inner dimension, which is the title of this series, to try to delve deeply under the surface, even then, but there's still always necessarily going to be a level beyond that. In the Sichos around Shiurim on Tuesday nights, we're talking a lot about, and we've spoken a lot about, the concept of Tachlis Hayediyah Asher Lo Neida, that the pinnacle of knowledge, and that the true tzaddik's das is defined by this, that it's a never-ending cycle of hasagas, deeper perceptions, deeper perceptions. And the depth of perception is always going to be defined at the end of one level of perception by the awareness that I still don't know anything, that I'm always still going deeper and deeper and deeper, further and further, wider and wider. And the more I go into this expanse, the more I realize like I'm able to peek beyond the next curve and see, whoa, this road is even further, goes even further than I thought. And then you get to the next road and you peek around the corner and it's even further, right? Or as you walk into the expanse, you see how much that expanse continues to widen and widen and widen and widen. So does the tzaddik, who in a certain way knows that he knows less than everyone else, does he know less than everyone else? Of course not. He knows far more than everybody else, right? But this knowledge is defined by his awareness of how little he truly knows, and therefore the biggest tzaddik is the most humble tzaddik. And that humility does not negate his awareness of his greatness, right? He knows how much he knows, but that knowledge brings him always to the awareness of how little he knows, and it's a never-ending cycle to proceed into that awareness. And that's what he says over here, is that the tachlis, bottom line, at the end of all of the das that we're going to amass and how much depth we're going to be able to reveal beyond each and every detail of halacha, that's really, it's so funny. Many people for some reason set up like a more Hasidish approach to Yiddishkeit versus a more Litvish approach or a non-Hasidish approach to Yiddishkeit as the distinction between Hasidus and like halacha. Like somehow, if you're involved in Hasidus, so you must, it's just, you're going to obscure the halachic points, or you don't care so much about the details, and it's all about Hashem's love and so on and so forth. And there may be some truth to that, certainly, because there are extremes and fringes of every movement, and there's going to be a negative wherever you want to look. Obviously, if you search for it, it depends what lenses and what glasses you're wearing and what you're really looking for. But the truth is that if we're engaging in Hasidus in a balanced, healthy way, in a normal way, in the proper way, in the way in which it was embodied by the tzaddikim who we're trying to learn from, not just what they say, because what they say can be interpreted in 1,000 ways, but how they lived, mamash, how they lived, then we're going to realize that the more we learn the depth of Torah, the more we're connected to Agada, the more we're compelled to keep every sif katan in Shulchan Aruch, and the more we gain interest in the Gemara once we learn what Gemara is. Right, and what for the guys over here, some of the women are learning Gemara also today, but for the guys predominantly, it's a struggle sometimes to learn Gemara, right? And it's dry and it's technical, and we say, where's the godliness? Where's the ha'ara? I want to light Chanukah neiros my whole life. Like what's this Indian that I have to sit and go through the details of, we're learning Psachim now, go through the details of what is B'dikas Chametz, what does the Pnei Yeshua hold, what is the Tazramin Peretz hold, and the Ran and the Rush, what is that all? Where's godliness there? But really, once you understand what the Torah is in all of its facets and all of its aspects, and then all of the mitzvahs that we do that's founded on these details of details, so memela, it gives us so much more excitement and it gives us so much more interest to really start to really learn these things, because we realize that the depth of Agada is to be found underneath the hood of every single detail and details of the Torah. I give a few shiurim of this based on Rav Kook's Oros HaTorah. They're found on SoundCloud, but that series really focused on this for any of the chevra, like all of us, who are having a hard time learning that aspect of Torah once we're so drawn to Hasidus and Pnimis Torah. Many of us heard that clip from Rav Asher Weiss that LPI sent out last week, where he said we shouldn't feel guilty at all, and particularly Adarabah guilty. But this is our generation, right? We're the generation of Pnimius. We're the generation of the inside people, the moon people, the people that are feeling, the people that are searching for the lost princess, for that lost spirit of connection. So for us, of course, we're going to be drawn to that aspect, but one need not negate the other. And on the contrary, the more that a person is engaged in the study of Pnimius, the more we're going to be attracted to the fine points of halacha. And that's a very important thing. We have to keep a balance. It's one of the values of LPI, is to try to keep that balance between halacha and agada, and to be right in that healthy center that's vibrating with passion, but at the same time doesn't deviate 1 ounce of one theological ounce and certainly practical ounce from the Shulchan Aruch. So that's an important thing. But be that as it may, the more we learn the depth of Torah, the more we realize we don't really know anything. Sefas Emes, kol inyinei Torah u'mitzvahs ein das ha'adam ha'seges la'omek ha'kavana. We can never penetrate to the deepest depth of what each detail of halacha is. Listen to these words. If a person were to really understand the ultimate depth of a mitzvah, amazing thing. If you really understood and you really were able to tap into the omek hakavana, to the intention that one is supposed to be having when engaged with a mitzvah, then your kavana would be so complete that the action would be pointless. And here, what he's really coming to ask is a very fundamental question that's dealt with by the name of the Melech, Reb Tzaddik, which is a Talmud of the Ishbitzer and of Ishbitzer Bechlal. But many of the tzaddikim talk about this question, and it's a uniquely Hasidic question because, again, it's founded in the premise that kavana is the ikr. Also, one of the principles we're going to learn with the Chevra, or anybody who has the book that's reading through it or read the story and understands a little bit of the depth, understands that when the king, when Rabbi Nachman tells us in the story, and I hope that you all read it, it's mamish, free, it's accessible on the website for anybody, without buying the book, but it's just there. It's such an important story to read. Rabbi Nachman was me'id. He gave testimony that anybody who hears the story has some sort of hirur tshuva deep down inside. So who wouldn't want to take that up? It's you don't have to fast for 1,000 years. You could just read a little story. It's the easiest thing and the sweetest thing, the most beautiful and interesting, fascinating thing. But when the king says, or Rabbi Nachman says, that the king loved spending time with the daughter, and the daughter we're going to learn is kavana. So that means that the king had 6 sons. We're going to learn Be'ez Hashem about what that means next week for those chaver in the course. But Rabbi Nachman tells us that even though the king has 6 sons, but what he cares the most about is the kavana. And Chazal really tell us this, Rachmana Leiba Boy, that the master of the world desires the heart. Ezu avodas shabalev zeu tefillah connected to midim. The whole world is standing on the tamid. Everything relies on the bechina of tefillah, avodas shabalev, emuna. All of these heart feelings. That's what God really wants. Now, if that's so, and this is a question, again, that's really, it's asked, but it's sort of an unasked question that's answered in various ways. If that's so, and you take a look at the Noam Lamelech Parshas Chayei Sarah, has an amazing mahalach with this, mamish amazing. But if that is so, that kavana is so important, so why do we need to do practical mitzvahs? Why can't a person just sit and have all of the kavana, the deep kavanas, the intentions that all the mitzvahs are supposed to bring us to or serve as vessels for, and we don't have to do any mitzvah. We don't have to do any mitzvah masid, which is one of the mahalchim of how the avos were mekayim the Torah, that really the avos didn't do the actual action. That doesn't mean that Yitzchak Avinu wore tefillin shel yad and tefillin shel rosh, but it means that he was zochet to the hasagos of the deeper kavanas of these mitzvahs, and that's what it means that he was mekayim the mitzvahs. And that's what some tzaddikim say. If you look in Tanya, for example, the Baal Tanya also deals with this, why we have to do mitzvahs ma'asiyos dafka. But here the Mea Shiloach is dealing with this question, and the answer he gives is unbelievable. Then he gets an implied answer. The answer the Mea Shiloach gives here is a phenomenal thing. And he says that you're right. You're right. If a person were to be able to be masig, to attain the full extent of kavana of mitzvahs, then you're right, Rahman al-Liba boy, the ikr is the kavana, and he wouldn't need to do the action because the action would be redundant, because the only reason that we have the action is to serve as a vessel for the kavana, either to awaken the kavana inside of us, etc., etc. But if a person has the kavana to the infinite extent, to the ultimate extent, so then he wouldn't need it. Says the Mea Shiloach, you know why we need to do mitzvahs ma'asiyos? Because the truth is that the omek kavana of mitzvahs is impossible to attain. The ultimate depth, the ultimate meaning, the ultimate import of mitzvahs is absolutely impossible for a person to attain, and that is hinted to us or intimated to us in this, that there's a chiyuv to keep the mitzvahs. Amazing thing. Because the truth is, again, that if we were to be able to attain the extent of kavanas mitzvahs, we would not need to do the actual mitzvahs. Because Rahmana Liba Boy, and the ikr is the kavana, that's the ikr. That's the ikr. Says the Ishbitzer. In this, that the Torah is mechayev, even the biggest gadol and mekubal and tzaddik and the Arizal and that all the shvil and the rakia are open up to them. That the Arizal could know the deepest sodos of tefillin that there is possible to reveal, that he reveals, all the sodos of the mitzvahs, but he still needs to put on tefillin. Why? What does that tell us? That tells us that even the Arizal, that even the Rashbi, that even Moshe Rabbeinu was not able in this lifetime to attain, and even the next lifetime, tzaddikim ein lehem menucha, afilu ba'olam haba, yelchu michayil el chayil. It's infinite. That is olam haba. Olam haba is connected to the bechina of bina. Bina is his bonus. That's what olam haba is. Rabbi Nachman in Torah in Torah Beis in Tinyan, the second chelik tells us olam haba is just to receive the das of Hashem, and it's never ending. And it goes on and on and on and on because God is infinite. And so knowing him is infinite, and intimacy with him is infinite levels. So even these tzaddikim are going to need to do mitzvahs maisios because that tells us that it is impossible for these tzaddikim to ever attain the fullest extent. That's what chiv mitzvahs for all Jews tells us. Crazy, amazing thing. Mamash, an amazing thing. And we'll read it inside again. Therefore, that even the biggest tzaddik and the biggest makubal is not able to attain this infinite, ultimate level of understanding. So that's why you need to still have that bechina of a maisa, Sha'al yadam, that through the maisa yigmar omek ha'or balev ha'adam sha'af shaloi midaitoi nikba achar kach boy kedusha. That the action sort of seals in that holiness that is unable to be attained on a knowledge level, on a das level, but in the maisa it's there. Because the maisa creates, the action creates a vessel for everything. The kavana is the kavana. The kavana that I have in my mind is limited to what I know. But what do you know about what you're supposed to be doing? Well, I know the depth of the action. That in a deeper level, and this is such a pella, the Ishbitzer is the deepest of the deep. He has short little pieces, but each piece is ada omek, not like long drushim, mostly short little pieces, but you have to really work on them. Mama spend a long time on this. So let's work this through together. That at the deepest level of kavana is the under the hood of the maisa. Now, if I understood the depth of what the maisa is supposed to imply to me, and what is hinted to, and what, when it comes down to this world, becomes an actual action, then memela I don't need to do the action. But because the kavana is necessarily incomplete, then again I need the action. And in this approach, the action comes out to be deeper than the kavana. This is a very big paradigm shift. Oftentimes we view the maisa as being the lower part and the kavana as being the higher part, right? That's often the way that we think about it. The kavana is the bechina of leiv, and that's the fire, that's the neshama, and the maisa is just the guf, is just the body. And so you need to put the two together because a body needs a soul. But what's more important, the body or the soul? The body is there to serve the soul. The soul is not there to serve the body. Comes the Me'ashilach and he turns that whole thing on its head. And the Me'ashilach tells us in this setup, in this arrangement, that the truth is that it's the opposite. That it comes out that because kavana is going to ultimately necessarily be limited, then in the light of that fact, the maisa that we are all obligated to take turns out to be a vessel for that which is even deeper than kavana. That which is even deeper than kavana. So it turns out in this setup that the truth is not true. The truth is we always think that the soul is more powerful and more important than the body. But in a certain way, it's not true. In a certain way, the Jewish body is so much invested with the root of our soul that in a certain way, the body is even holier than the soul. In a certain way, the body is able to tap into deeper spiritual perceptions than the soul itself. Without getting to the whole sugya now, but Ishbitzer in general is a very controversial chasidus, or it was historically controversial. The Svarim were burned, I misnagdim and chasidim alike, the Me'ashilach Svarim. And the controversy largely revolves around the uniquely Ishbitzer focus on the concept of Aveira Lishma, of how a tzaddik who reaches a level of ultimate birur, that's an Ishbitzer word, clarification, which means that he gets the ego completely out of the way, says the tzaddik. The Ishbitzer writes that if a tzaddik is able to get to this point where he's completely mivurar legamri, where he wipes out all ego, all ulterior motives completely, such a person, if he has a tendency or he has an urge, a Yetzirah, what to somebody else would be a Yetzirah, because it's trying to get him to transgress a clear halach and shulchan aruch, says the Me'ashilach, to such a person, it turns out that that urge is coming from a holy place because he doesn't have a Yetzer Hara anymore. He completely reached complete total birur. Memela, if he has a draw for it, must be that that's really what Hashem's omek ratzon is for him in this moment, and that it overrides what HaKadosh Baruch Hu's expressed desire is in Shulchan Aruch or in the Torah, and he's able in that moment, to harasha, to follow that Yetzer Hara because it's not really a Yetzer Hara and it's really a Yetzer Tov. Okay, now you could. I have a list of Baruch Hashem. As I learned through Meshilach, I marked down all the different Torahs that talk about this Indian. There's not one parsha that doesn't mention this in some form, in some way. And this piece is also talking about that in a deep, hidden way. But Mamash, I have a list on my Meshilach here, the first volume, hundreds of places throughout Meshilach where he talks about this, hundreds of places. And there are those already that did studies in academia. They did studies on Ishbitzer where basically they demonstrate this thread that goes through all of his teachings, and it's a very deep and a very lofty sort of perception, but we can understand why this would be controversial, right? Because who's going to give edus on himself that he reached a place of complete birur? How easy is it for a person to say, yeah, no, I don't have a Yetzer Hara anymore, and then the Yetzer Hara that's really we think is the Yetzer Tov, no, but it's really the Yetzer Hara, and it's certainly not what Hashem wants you to do. And also, obviously, the Nefesh HaChaim is very clear that after the Torah was given on Har Sinai, there's no longer such a thing as Aver Lishma. It was only before Matan Torah. Okay, so it's a big conversation. It's a huge sugya. We can't get into it now. But at the root of the Ishbitzer's concept, and this is a paradox and a paradigm shift and a totally different way of looking at things, the Ishbitzer's approach is that in a certain way, the body can be holier than the soul in a certain way, that the body can be privy to things that the soul is not privy to. And this shows up again in the Ishbitzer concept of Aver Lishma, of having a Yetzer Hara, having a lowly bodily physical urge that to somebody else that would be selfish, and that tzaddik in Ishbitz is able to reach a place of a shikol adas to say, oh my gosh, if my body is telling me something and I don't have a body, meaning because I've already gotten that out of the way, then it must be that my body is tapping into the omek ratzon Hashem that's even deeper than the Torah that my soul knows or that my soul has learned. Amazing. Mamish, an amazing thing. That the Yetzer Hara, in a certain way, is able to override the Yetzer Tov that's rooted in the neshama. Here we see an expression of that. It's very subtle. It's very hidden. But what the Ishbitzer is really telling us here is that the action, the body, right, in mitzvahs, is in a certain way holier than the kavanah. Because the kavanah is limited. But it's the guf, it's the ma'isa ha-mitzvah that becomes a vessel for everything. For everything. In an amazing, amazing way. I hope that's clear because that's important to put these two things together. That's an amazing thing. Lachain, therefore, he says, right? And that's, we already read that line. We'll just repeat it. That's why, because we cannot access the deepest extent of our kavana. Therefore, we have to do the avodah. We have to do pu'ulas. So that holiness that's going to always transcend the soul's perception can be baked into the body that in a deepest paradoxical way is even holier than the soul in a certain crazy way. Because the lower down the physicality, the higher the spiritual light that is shining in an attempt or that grants it the ability to reach down to that lowly place, right? That if you have a pit, and we spoke about this at length in Likutei Moharan shiur 2 years ago, was the world of Chabur, the world of Breslov Chabur, when we talked about Torah Yud. This is the whole Torah Yud in Likutei Moharan, which is a Purim Torah. It's all on this idea, right? That if you have a very shallow little bucket, you don't need such a big light to illuminate it, just a little match, right? But if you have a huge, deep mine, right, or a pit, you need to have floodlights in order to reach down there. And so in a certain way, the body, specifically because of its distance from Kedusha, when it's illuminated, Gewalt is it illuminated, right? And that's part of this idea. So it becomes a vessel for the highest, for Mamish the highest. Okay, and that's what the Ishbitzer is telling us over here. Therefore, Amrut Chila Nase. That's why by Matan Torah, Am Yisrael first said Nase, we're in. What's Nase? Nase is the guf. Nase is the Maisa. We said we're in it. We're just going to do the maisa. We're just going to do the action, not because, and this is so important. This is so important. Again, I want to take a step back. It's possible to suggest and from a very Litvish point of view, again, not to put labels, but just from a not Hasidish point of view, it's very possible to see Nasa v'nishma as sort of an anti-Hasidic sentiment, right? Because the Torah seemingly is telling us that what do you need to understand the depth of mitzvahs for? Just nasa. First thing is do it. Just learn pshat. Don't touch remez until you're 99 and a half years old and you already learned all of Shas and Poskim. You have it down pat, which nobody does, right? And then you can open up a Tanya or a Likutei Moharan. But no, it's not for now. And when Be'ez Hashem v'chulei, all these tainas that are easily challenged, but we'll get to that at a different time, Be'ez Hashem. And we get to that in the book. So Be'ez Hashem in chapter 15, you'll read all of these points and counterpoints to the benefit and the possible damage or the possible harm of learning Pnimis HaTorah and what that conversation looks like. But it's very possible to see Nasa v'nishma as really telling us that, right? That the premise of the Torah is Nasa. First, just do it, which is just the basic action. And then nishma. Then in a further lifetime somewhere, in 7 decades, then you're going to be able to open up the Zohar Kodesh. You'll be very old. You have a long white beard, and then you'll be holy enough, or you'll be learned enough, or advanced enough to be able to learn these things. That's what Nasa v'nishma could tell us. Here, the Ishbitzer takes Nasa v'nishma, and he turns it around in the most remarkable way. Yes. The Me'ashiloach tells us that Am Yisroel bivadai said Nase, not simply with all the Torahs we learned last week, Nase to get through the difficult time, the cholei. No. They said Nase in reference to the Maisa mitzvah levad, without kavana. Yes, that's true. But you know why they said Nase first? Because so committed were they to the panemius of the mitzvahs that they understood that their nishma, which they intended to do, and not in 7 generations now, was necessarily going to be limited to the point that it was the Maisa that was going to reveal the deepest omek of what it was that they intended to delve into when they said nishma. You understand what's happening here? It's unbelievable. Nasa, they said, and it's difficult when I don't see faces. I don't know B'chlal if you're like, it's very hard to give a shiur when, whatever, everybody's, don't want to put pressure on anybody, chas v'shalom, whatever you're comfortable with, but it's challenging, Baruch Hashem. But because I don't see reactions, to so much of a shiur is and being in person also is a whole different world. But he's saying something amazing. His mom is saying something amazing. That Am Yisrael was talking about the Maisa HaMitzvah levad, without kavana. But in doing so, they were beiskasya, on a hidden level, they were mamish talking about cholei kavana, cholei sod, agada, the under the hood of all the remez. Just they wanted to express the extent of that. So first they said nasa because we realized that the guf is holier than the neshama, and that the secrets that are packed into a holy physicality is even higher than the secrets packed into a holy spirituality. Nasa the nishma, it's an amazing Torah, it's an amazing thing. 4 lines from the Ishbitzer, and it blows your mind. Mamish blows your mind. It's like mamish heavy drugs, Yeah, exactly. Mind blown, mamish. It's heavy drugs, Ishbitz. Oh my gosh, it's so deep. We could talk about this for a very long time, and I hope that we will, and I hope that we'll all think about this for a very long time. There's a lot to work through here. It's like 5 lines, but it changes everything. Mama changes everything. And that's what they intended, but not because they intended that the most important thing is to just do mitzvahs mindlessly. No, of course not. Of course not. Lo yala aladas. The main thing is the princess. Rahman Leiba Bas Hashem b'simcha. Shivisi Hashem l'negdisame. Daso the kenavi chavavdeu v'chulei. Of course not. Nobody would have suggested such a thing. Nobody. And they all quote it from the Nefesh HaChaim, as if the Nefesh HaChaim says that a person should do mitzvahs, without any kavanah. Nope. Anybody who quotes the Nefesh HaChaim as saying that never learned Nefesh HaChaim for 1 minute. Maybe they learned something from Shar Dalet, which talks about Leiba Torah as the Iker. There are 3 other Sharim in Nefesh HaChaim. Nobody touches. In the yeshivas, they don't learn that. Only the 4th Shar, because that's a safe space, that talks about Leiba Torah, that they're comfortable with. But the 1st Shar that talks about Gadlus ha'adam or Pnimius ha'adam, the 2nd shar that talks about tefillah, which Bechlal they don't focus on, and the 3rd shar that speaks about Hashem, Yud Kei Vav Kei, Hamakom, the deepest omen. And again and again and again and again, the Nefesh HaChaim tells us, of course, lechatchila. Who would suggest such a thing? Nasa without any nishma? Nobody. Says the Me'ashiloach, even though it says Nasa v'nishma over here, that is not what they mean. Even though, again, they were intending for the Ma'isa mitzvah levad. They were intending for guf alone, guf ha-mitzvahs. But beyond the surface, they were intending for the deepest, deepest omek hasod that can only be attained through the Ma'isa mitzvah levad. V'achar kach nishma shebikshu me'Hashem Yisbarach sheyavinam, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu should give them the ability to understand. Achar kach omika inyan, and he says kamo av. This can be given like a mashal of a father shehoylech imrei hakatan, that goes on a trip on a tiyul with his little son. Umatza matma yakar. And they mamash encounter this beautiful, wonderful treasure. I don't know, they're walking outside and they see just a bunch of $100 bills, just floating along the ground. And it's nobody's in the middle of nowhere. They don't know where it came from, but just you start grabbing, So a 2-year-old, a 3-year-old, a 4-year-old, he doesn't understand. His son doesn't understand what's the value. It's a couple of pieces of paper that are floating, He doesn't understand yet the value of money, but the father does. And so he tells his son, just grab as much as you can. The kid doesn't understand, like, what's so important over here to grab all these funny pieces of paper with some face on it? What's the Indian? Vishalas aviv, and the father and the son says, okay, a little bit older, he asks his father, like, what's my high? What's the point here? The Hishavla Aviv, and the father answers, listen to me, Maher, kach kol mashetucha, just grab it, grab whatever you can. Once we get home, you understand? Once we get home, I'll explain to you what this is about, but right now, just grab. Not because there's no reason for why we're grabbing. I cannot tell you how important this is. I'm only realizing now as I'm speaking how important this is. Not because there's no reason. Not because the father says, Stam, I don't know, just grab them. Makes no difference why, just grab them. No, of course the father knows the reason. And of course he wants his son to understand the reason, of course. But the father says, the more money we have, the more my reason is going to be able to come across, to be able to really let you know the value of the money that we gather. So if you grab $5 or if you grab $10, so how impactful will it be for me to describe to you what we can buy with that money, for example? Of course, money's valuable. I'll be able to explain it to you. But my son, the more you grab, the more, and right now it's not about the reason. Right now, just grab. But of course, it's for the reason. You understand? Of course, the more you grab quantitatively in a sense of just externality, then Be'ezra Hashem, he says, when we get back home, I'm going to be able to reveal to you the reason. Of course, the Iker is the reason. The Iker is only ever the reason. This is totally mind-blowing and totally valuable in the deepest, deepest way. It's so deep. It's mamish so deep. It's so deep. It's so deep. Into what they succeeded in accomplishing. Master of the world, you've lifted us to this bracha of your ma'adim. And here we come, Chazei Hashem, into the time of a moed of Adar, which we began this year with. Here we come into Mishnichnas Adam Arba B'Simcha, into Purim, into a moed. Hashem Yisbarach Yisroel Or Bahir Shalom Alami Daitam. And this is going to take us into the Sefas Emes, that when it comes time for Purim, the Master of the world is shining down a spiritual illumination that's way beyond our mind's ability to grasp, way beyond, way beyond. They're not able to understand, our minds are not able to grasp what Purim is, Gilui of the highest spiritual levels. No hasaga. Purim is the highest day of the year. The Yom Kippur is called Yom HaKippurim, and the Gemara in Tainis tells us mi nitla b'mi kata nitla b'gadol. Right, when you want to compare one thing to another and you want to demonstrate the greatness of this thing, so you don't say Gevalt, like the Cadillac drove so wonderfully that it almost drove like a Honda Odyssey. Right? That's not the comparison you make. You say the Odyssey drives so smooth, it drives like a Cadillac, right? Or whatever it is. It's the same thing. Yom Kippur is Yom Kippurim. The way that we try to describe the greatness of Yom Kippur is by comparing it to Purim. Do you understand? Yom Kippur, Keser. Yom Kippur is the highest day of the year, like Malach and angels, complete kapara, wiped away, and Purim is even deeper than that. Purim is even deeper than that. Yom Kippur is Yom Kippurim. That the small thing is compared to the big thing. So there's a great light shining in the Mayed. I'm sorry, I skipped a line. They're not able to understand the depth. So we ask the Master of the world, listen, we don't say, let us understand the depth of your yontiv. No, we don't do that because there's no time. There's no time. If a person's going to want to understand how breathing works, so you understand that, it's not before he breathes. It doesn't work that way. Breathe. And then you'll understand. And the more you breathe, hopefully, the more you're going to be able. May Hashem, we should breathe until 120, a ripe old age, happily and healthily, particularly now when the people that are having trouble breathing, May Hashem should strengthen them in the most amazing way. But we're gonna be able to understand what breathing is only by virtue of the premise of the fact that we're doing so and the fact that we're breathing in the first place. And so we ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu not give us the understanding of Yontiv, the deep mystical. So does that mean again that we hold there's no mystical intention of Purim? Of course not. Of course, that's the ikr. Of course, the mitzvahs have infinite depth. But the main thing is in the moment is to say to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, lift me up. Bring me into your yontiv. Allow me to fulfill every mitzvah on the basic level, each and every halacha b'shleimas, with all the chumras, b'shleimas. Now, even though on the outside, a person looks at such a person, he says, wow, such a simple, he's just engaging Yiddishkeit in a way of nigle, he's so interested in the halacha. It's like, come on, guy, what are you learning Mishnah, Mishnah Brewer the whole day for? Maybe crack open a Likutei Moharan or a Tanya or something like that. But a Jew like this, the whole reason that he's learning halacha is because he's trying to tap into a sod that's even deeper than what's going to be brought on the Sfar. Now, of course, one cannot negate the other. The nishma and the nase go together, always go together. But the first thing is nase tamu ure'u kitay Hashem. It's the same thing. Nase v'nishma, taste and then see. Because in a certain way, even though yes, the kavanah is important, but in a certain crazy paradoxical way, the doing is a vessel for that which is even greater than the kavanah. The body is in a certain way even holier than the soul. The Yetzer Hara, in a certain way, is able to override in certain situations, at least in the school of Ishbitzer, the Yetzer Tov, in a crazy way. And so that's what we beg of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Hainu, she'ya'amis lanu es birchas hamoyed, v'achar kach b'chol eis, right, namik lahav erech yakor sa'ar. Then we'll have a lot of time to really learn about it, to think about it. But the main thing is, how do I make vessels for that which is beyond whatever I'll learn? And not because we're simple Jews. Well, hopefully we should be simple Jews, but not because we are satisfied, and that's the ikr. Not because we are satisfied with engaging in Yiddishkeit in a basic, simple way. No, we're not. We are not satisfied with that. And we are not just going to go by the checklist Judaism and be okay with that and be satisfied with that and give that over to our children as if that's the ikr. That's not the ikr. The ikr is havana. The ikr is kavana. The ikr is emotion. The ikr is a relationship with the HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Adaso. That's the ikr, unequivocally, unapologetically. That's the main thing. And that, I feel, is not being given over in our schools enough. And that's why the whole Lost Princess Initiative is focused with the course and the book and the story. And everything we're trying to do is to raise awareness of this. Because I don't feel, and many of us don't feel, and haven't had the experience, that this nekuda was hammered home deeply enough. And we're unapologetic about that. That's the ikr. Throughout Chazal we find this, throughout Pesukim we find this, and anything else, any other approach that negates this is a siluf and an ivos, is a corruption of Yiddishkeit, a corruption. But at the same token, by the same time, and not despite that, but because of that, it's us that we're plugged into this kind of ashkafa, that we need to care even more about halacha than the so-called purely halachic Jews. You understand? An amazing thing? The balance between the two and the non-stira, and on the contrary, how one and the other are one mamish, one unified. Unbelievable. So then it will become nikba b'libeinu, v'chein b'kan amru nase koidim l'nishma. That's why over here, Am Yisroel said nasa before nishma. Yes, nasa was talking about the simple avodah. Nasa was talking about just doing it. But doing it because of the nishma. Because we realize that the vessel of simple halachic observance But really, 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 to learn halacha, without learning halacha, we don't know what to do b'chalal. So really, very important, kala, right? Kala loyim halacha b'chol yom muftach loy, right? Kala shoyin about halacha b'chol yom muftach loy shu ben olam haba. Olam haba is the world of bina. Bina is Havana, is understanding, right? And he's a ben olam haba, but it's only through the vessels of the halacha that we're learning. So we got to learn, and we got to really try to to think of that very, very deeply, and to make those vessels for the purpose of then being able to create those vessels and have access to something that's even deeper than what we would have been able to learn in this farm. Just to do it, just to go, not go through the motions, but to learn the halachas and to really be in it, in the basic physical action. Just to do whatever it is that is in our ability to do. And this piece is like, I'm telling you, we could talk about this. The implications of this are so broad and so deep, and it's just such an amazing thing. So with the last couple of minutes, I just want to jump into this Sefas Emes quickly, and it's related to this. And hopefully this is going to bring us into Purim. This is Sefas Emes actually on Purim. It's not on Parshas Mishpatim, even though it also talks about Nasa v'Nishma and what that was by Purim, by Har Sinai, and what that expression of Nasa v'Nishma, when the pasuk says Kimu v'kiblu haYehudim, and the Gemara tells us in Megillah Kimu mashikiblu kfar, right, that they re-accepted the Torah and all the Svarim Amarach. What was the distinction between the Kabbalas HaTorah of Shavuos and the Kabbalas HaTorah of Purim? One was Yira, one was Ava. Okay, we're going to get into that now. But Kimu v'kiblu is, says the Sefas Emes, a mirroring of Nasa v'Nishma. Kimu means just to do. Kiblu means gevalt. We accept it into the deepest part of ourselves. The same thing, just like we had Nasa v'Nishma by Purim, by Shavuos, by Matan Torah, Kabbalas HaTorah, so too we have Kimu v'Kiblu by Purim, and these two things are a reflection of one another. Says the Sefas Emes, and hopefully this won't take too long, and let's dive in. The Tosfos Hukshu, the Gemara, the Tosfos in Masechus Shabbos asks, famous question, Hahikdimu Nasa l'Nishma. Why did Am Yisrael need to re-accept the Torah by Achashverosh if they had already said Nasa v'Nishma? Like what's a re-acceptance, right? They already said we're going to do and we're going to listen. They accepted upon themselves. What's Hadar Kiblua b'mei Achashverosh? And in the days of Achashverosh, they re-accepted upon themselves. Avol Nireh, listen to this. Avol Nireh appears, and this is also so deep. What a privilege to be able to learn these teachings with you, Mamish. Thank each and every one of you for joining me. Listen to this. Avol Nireh appears, HaKadosh Baruch Hu Ra'ah, Hashem saw, or foresaw, Sheyechatu, that Am Yisrael are going to end up sinning, Achar Kach Be'egel, that Am Yisrael, it's the wildest thing in the world, that after Matan Torah, Pel Dabar, that we spoke to HaKadosh Baruch Hu face to face, we don't even know what that means, and then Mamish, like 5 minutes later, we're serving idols. Like, how does that happen, right? And as far as Marmarech, the Rishonim Marmarech, right, and at length, to really understand what was it, we look at Meshech Chachma, something very, very deep there, Meshech Chachma, all the Svarim, Reb Nassim in Likutei Halachos, Berachos HaPeiros talks about it, the Ar Yaakov Kodesh, the Ramban. Everybody has, a shita and a svar and a mahalach and how that happened. And it's important to know all of them, because they're all true. And but Hashem saw that this was going to happen, the Medrash says. And when they did that, they lost the Nasa. They lost that aspect of Nasa, that they said Nasa v'Nishma, and then they went ahead and they did what they did, and it was a disaster, as the Medrash tells us. Listen to this. Through this, that Am Yisrael, when they received the Torah, prefaced their acceptance with these words, or with this word Nasa. We're going to do, even if we don't understand, even when it's not easy, even when it's hard, even when we don't want to. This ties back into the Mari 9 from last week. Even when things are tough, to still be there, still show up, hang out until Morrow is finished and the Shulchan Aruch begins, etc. Everybody knows that by Matan Torah, HaKadosh Baruch Hu lifted up the mountain and held it over the head of Am Yisrael, which the Chiddushei Rim, the other tzaddikim say, the Rabbi Nachman also refers to this, or the Mari 9 actually says this, that it was mamish like a chuppah. Hashem held the mountain over our head like a wedding canopy, not in this fearsome way, in a beautiful way. But We know that Hashem held the mountain over our head, and the Medrash records, or the Gemara records these words that Hashem said, if you receive the Torah, great. So you're going to have this, your burial will be on the mountain. That's a lot. We don't have time to go into it now. Says the Sefas Emes, it was a zechus. It was a merit that they merited that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so to speak, forced us into receiving the Torah. In the zechus of Am Yisrael having already set in that mindset, and that
Yaakov, someone's talking.
We're going to do it, makes no difference what, makes no difference if we understand, if not, they were then zochet to the aspect of Kaf aleim har kegigis, that the mountain is held over their head. What does this mean? Pirish says Sefas Emes, Shenita lehem haTorah ba'al karcha, that the Torah was given to them against their will, v'lachein, therefore, in the merit, not even in the merit, but because the giving of the Torah is founded on a premise of being forced, or on a premise of nasa, and because they said nasa, that they were zocha for Hashem to force them into it. Even though it seems harsh and it seems difficult to understand, like what's that about? But because the Torah came about in that way to Am Yisrael, nishra lehem haTorah gam achar achet. Because the Torah was given in such a way where it was beyond our control, that tells us that the Torah is rooted deeply within our neshama that comes from beyond the place of bechira. And this ties into what the Ishbitzer says. We don't have time now to go into the omek of how these pieces connect in the deepest way. But I'm sure, if you think about it deeply, you'll see how the mamish they connect. We talked about how the Ishbitzer says that a tzaddik can reach a level where there's ki'ilu no bechira, right? Ki'ilu he's forced, ki'ilu he's compelled, ki'ilu the body is taking him into such a place to do an aveira, and it's not an aveira for him, cholei. This that Am Yisrael received the Torah against their will was exactly what enabled us to survive the Chet Egel. Because in giving us the Torah in this way, you know what HaKadosh Baruch Hu is telling Am Yisrael? It's very sweet, you make choices. And sometimes you make a choice to receive the Torah. Sometimes you make a choice not to receive the Torah. But HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, Chavra, your relationship with the Torah is completely transcendent of your own consciousness, of your own perception of identity. This goes back into the Chavra who are reading the book, who read chapter 1, and to us in the course that we spent an hour and a half last night, going through this sugya, but omek, imke amkos. And you remember what I told you for the Chavra in the course, that this is the layer of snow, you remember, that everything else is going to be able to be processed through these ideas we're learning. This is it. Any piece of Hasidus you learn, if you know the 25 principles that we're learning, basically is going to be able to find its place where it fits, what it's connected to. And here we see that mamish already. Open up the next piece you learn the Hasidus is this Nekuda mamish, right? That HaKadosh Baruch Hu is forcing the Torah onto us to tell us that it goes beyond what our mind is able to grasp. What's good for us, what's not good for us, what we think our identity is. HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, I forced you into it because you are essentially forced into it, because you are the Torah and the Torah is you, so you don't have the freedom to break away, even though you think you're breaking away. Because there's no freedom of choice with regard to your connection to the Torah, because it's your essence. And your freedom of choice is founded in the conception of your own personality. And your personality is founded upon being forced into the Torah, because that is you. That is you. And anything else, like we learned last night, is a distraction. Those chavra that are reading the book, chapter 1, machshavas zaris, foreign thoughts have nothing to do with you. Hashem is karov mikol karov. He's the deepest core of who we are, the deepest essence of our identity. Ayin, me ayin him lekuchim, like we learned, leverchoikim legamre me avayin. All these things that we learned about last night for the chavra in the course, and we read about in the book, and that all the tzaddikim tell us. And that's why it remained with them. And with this we finish. But the truth is, says the Sefas Emes, interestingly enough, even though the truth is that it was the bechina of the Erev Rav, which is a big sugya, big complicated sugya, what the Erev Rav is and what they represent, and gets touchy, because now everybody is just pointing at anybody who disagrees with them. You're the Erev Rav. No, you're the Erev Rav. So forget it. Right? Once we start getting into that sort of thing, it's finished. Forget about that concept, right? Because who knows? But what the Erev Rav is a very, very deep thing. And on a simple level, Am Yisrael were affected by the Erev Rav, and it was them that pushed Am Yisrael. It was really them that did the Chet Egel, not really Am Yisrael. Says the Sefas Emes, who was Amalek. Mamash Amalek Harasha, we talked about last night, right? The Amalek that's connected to the Bechina of Asher Karcha Baderech, that cools us off along the way. Yimach Shemai. Shalule Hu She'ir Bas Yisroel Baderech. I can't. Okay, I'll just be in full honesty. I prepared for this year about 3 minutes before going on. I didn't have anything to teach. I opened up 2 Svarim, and this is the shiur. Okay, so that's just in full disclosure. This was not planned in any way, shape, or form. I could have picked any Torah from 10,000 Torahs that I have on my shelf of Svarim. Happened to be opened up a Sefas Emes. I opened up a Meshilach. I said, this looks like a nice piece. This looks like a nice piece. Let's put them together. Listen to this. I mean, did you ever see a piece that's more in line with what we learned last night for the Chevra on the course and the first chapter in the Baderech, these words, the same words that Rabbi Nachman used, Baderech siparti mais, asher karcha Baderech, the Amalek that tries to get us out of this feeling of being compelled and forced into the Torah because it's our deepest essence, that Amalek confuses us. From Rav Kook we learned, I mean, get out of here. Hashkacha eliyayna, mamish hashkacha eliyayna. And by the way, just, for any of the Chevra on here that are not part of the course, you're basically part of the course now. Like, it's clear that Hashkacha has it, that we should all be part of this. Mamash, we should be part of this. And of course, I mean that you should take the course eventually, the next round. But listen to this. If Amalek hadn't attacked them, they wouldn't have gotten into this business in the first place. What helped them recover from Amalek? It's just out of this world. What helped them get out of that was the fact that the Torah was given to them in a way of being forced, because that tells us that we're connected at our root. Okay, okay. Says the Heiligim Sefas Emes, that is why that Purim brought about a new acceptance of the Torah. Because what's Purim? Purim is getting rid of Amalek. What's Amalek? That Amalek tries to tell us that that's not your deepest identity. That Amalek tries to tell us that you could choose to break away from the Torah a little bit, that it's within your Bechira, but the truth is Torah is beyond our Bechira. We came to a place, we came to a makom of eradication of Amalek represented by Haman. Memela, we're back to a Kabbalas HaTorah. Memela, we're brought back to the place of nasa v'nishma, nasa. We're in it essentially. And that's the ikr, that's the yisod. That contains, like we learned from the Ishbitzer, all of the deepest sodos in the world, and we'll get to the nishma. But the main thing is that at the root, at the core, we're Jews. At the core, we're a pintalayid. At the core, we're the essence of holiness. Kisei HaKavod we learned about. That's why at the time of Purim, there's a resurgence of this feeling and a reacceptance of the Torah that was forced upon us in order to communicate to us the depth with which we are connected to the Torah b'shoresh. That's the opposite of Amalek. That Amalek was the one that caused the cholei ego because he confuses us with regard to who we really are. So therefore, Hadar Kiblua Shachazru Lezechus Hahakdama Shel Nase Lenishma. We return to the message powerfully contained within the expression Nase the Nishma. That Nase is the aspect of being forced into the Torah. We're in it no matter what. Even when we're not feeling it, we're going to schlep through it because this is who I am at my root, at the core. This is what my deepest identity is. Sure, like we learned from the Ishbitzer, we want to understand the deepest secrets of Torah, and we will, and we must. But we know that the deepest sod is just in the fact of being a Jew. That's the deepest sod of all, that contains infinite sodot, infinite. And therefore, when we get to the Bechina, when we get to this level of Purim, of another eradication of the Amalek that caused the cholei ego, that the only way that we recovered from that was through Nasa v'nishma. Mamela, we come to a place of Kimu, v'kiblu haYehudim. Kimu is Nasa, Kiblu is Nishma, and that's what Purim is. We come back to a place of the reacceptance of the Torah, which sits at the core, at the identity of who we are, because that's the eradication of Amalek, and that's the aspect of how to get by Amalek, and that's all wrapped up into the first sentence of the Lost Princess, which this whole thing is founded on, that Baderech siparti maisa, to return to the deepest identity, and that's the way to beat the Amalek that cools us off along the derech. Asher karcha baderech, that Rabbi Nachman's tale comes to save us from all of this. So mamish, like I feel like dancing right now, and I can't even tell you what I feel like, but wow, just the hashkacha here is not to be believed. Anyway, Ashreinu. Thank you so much for joining. I apologize for the chaver that aren't part of the course. There's a little bit of FOMO, I'm sure, and in a certain way, I want to foster that, because you really, Be'ezer Hashem, I really want all of Am Yisrael, really, Be'ezer Hashem, to be able to learn these ideas with us. But I think a little bit, it's not so deep in, So these are ideas that we're familiar with, but the hashgacha for those that are part of the course is almost miraculous, like that, not normal, really not normal. I'll tell you even a deeper truth. When I look at a Torah to prepare it, I don't really go through the whole thing, because I could sort of, Baruch Hashem, at this point, I could just look at 2 lines and see basically the Mahalach, and okay, I could teach that, I didn't really look through this whole Sefas Emes. I looked at it, the Kabbalah, okay, Nasa Nishmas, let's do it, Anyway, to say more would be to take away. Ashreinu Chevra, Ashreinu, thank you so much. I'm just going to look at the chat and see what Chevra is saying here. Yes, that's the Sefas Emes regarding Amalek. Yes, that's implicit in what he's saying over here. If you'll take a look, right, that the whole Cheta Egel was because of Amalek. When we wipe out Amalek, which is Purim, which is Haman, that Haman comes from Amalek, so we're able then to get back to the place of Nasa Nishma being forced. Ashreinu. This is So this, you'll see the year, right? The year is
I got it. Thank you.
Here, it's Taf Reish Lamed Zayin. Taf Reish Lamed Zayin. The Gemara Kimu V'Kiblu. You can mark it down in your notes. And I just want to go ahead and wish you the most beautiful, wonderful Shabbos, a Chodesh Tov, Mishnichnas Adar, Marabim B'Simcha. There's no Simcha like the Simcha of Torah. There's no Simcha like the Simcha of Aleph Dar, of the Master of the World's presence in our mitzvahs. And Mamish just Chevra, Ashreinu Legamri. Thank you for being a part of it. And Ashreinu, we'll be in touch. Thank you for joining. Thank you so much for joining, Chevra.
Thanks for doing it last minute with all
the
this.
Best. Wishing you the most beautiful Shabbos. Be'ezer Hashem up ahead. Shabbos, good Shabbos.